to our beautiful library of Irish whiskey flavours. This is very much where the heart and soul of Whiskey Bonding lives. Essentially, as Whiskey Bonders, it's our role to collect as many varieties of Irish whiskey flavours as we can from all over the country, to shepherd the whiskey from the moment it comes off of the still all the way through its maturation process, the blending process, and right into your glass. And that process starts right here in our beautiful rack house. Behind me here, you can see Whiskey Spirit maturing away, ranging in age from 0 years all the way up to 30 years old from multiple distilleries all across the island. Every single cask that we have, we know it personally, we know it intimately. Every time we source a cask, we're classifying that cask into a particular flavour block. We track those casks along their maturation period. We taste them all the time to see what direction they're going in. And then when we're finally ready to blend, we're pulling specific casks that we need from those flavour blocks to arrive at the whiskey flavour that we want to hit, essentially. We source two kinds of whiskey. We source new make whiskey straight off the still from new distilleries. We then go away and source casks separately to match the flavour profile of that spirit. We put them together and they're fully matured here on the farm. We also source stock that is already mature in living casks. That's stock from older distilleries around the island that's much more mature, that we use very often for our single malts and for top dressings in some of our amazing blends. When we built the rack house, we put a huge amount of thought into its construction, and we took a lot of inspiration from other whiskey making countries and from the past as well. All of our casks here are racked, they're stored on the bilge. We just believe fundamentally that it's an incremental benefit that we can add to the maturation procedure. By racking on the bilge, it just means that from the moment it goes into cask, the whiskey has contact with both heads of the barrel, something you don't get when you're palletizing. That extra surface area on the interior just gives a little extra push and a little more possibility of flavour extraction from the cask over a long period of time. The floor here in the rack house is simply earth with gravel on top. This is a very sort of dunnage style floor. It allows us to very naturally control the humidity in here. So we have a particular threshold of humidity for our casks for optimum maturation. If we feel or if we're alerted to the fact that it is too dry in here, in terms of controlling the humidity, all we have to do is spray the floor with water and it naturally controls the humidity. If it's too humid in here, we can just open the doors. It's a very natural process, but it's aided by technology. This little implement in here takes a humidity, temperature and wind speed recording every 2 minutes inside the rack house. We have it set so that it alarms us and tells us if any of those thresholds are going over the limits that we want, and then we can regulate it accordingly. So you normally don't see windows in a rack house. However, when I was building the rack house here, I had a really close look at the weather conditions on this exact spot. And according to Met Éireann, it is below 7 degrees centigrade about 50% of the year right here on the hill on the farm. Below that temperature, maturation effectively ceases to happen. You don't get a huge amount of interaction between the cask and the liquid that's inside it below that temperature. So that would have meant that about 50% of the year, none of this whiskey would have been maturing. It would have been lying fallow. So in order to counteract that, we built the rack house and we gave it that southern aspect. And then I put windows at the height of the winter sun, essentially. So during the winter months, the sun passes all the way down the long side of the rack house and it shines directly in on top of the barrels. And that ensures that our temperature never really dips below 7 degrees centigrade. And in fact, for the last 4 years we've had whiskey inside in the rack house here, we've only dipped below that threshold twice. So that means, again, it's a really incremental element to the rack house, but it just means we're pushing and naturally trying to get just that extra piece of incremental maturation out of all of our casks here, very naturally, and making the most of our surroundings. This is the only Bonders blending room on the island of Ireland, and we purpose-built this facility so that we can precision blend our J.J. Corrie Irish whiskies. We built this facility because it gives us total autonomy and total control over every element of the blending process of our whiskies. Very often we'll blend anything from 22 to 36 cases of whiskies for individual customers all around the world. And this facility allows us to be incredibly detailed in every single aspect of that process and to totally control the process. So behind me here, you'll see our big blending tanks. We have tanks here ranging in size from 200 to 10,000 litres, giving us total scope to do large-scale blends and small-scale blends. The 3 tanks behind me are for our larger scale blends like the Gale and like the Hansen. There is a blending tank, a marrying tank, and a proofing tank. Our approach to the blend, any blend that we make, is essentially to do separate vattings of every element of the blend first. So for example, the Gale is comprised of a heart of 2002 and 2006 malt. We'll disgorge those casks in here, very often doing partial disgorgements, and then we'll separately vat that 2002 and 2006 into one of our tanks. The top dressing on the Gale is 1991, and very often it's comprised of partial disgorgements of anything up to 15 1991 casks. We disgorge all of those here by hand, marry them together in a much smaller tank and leave to vat. And then the remainder of the Gale tends to be predominantly 2010 grain whiskey. We disgorge that separately and keep it separate. We let all of those individual vattings sit and get to know each other in tank for as long as we possibly can, anything from 2 weeks to a month and a half essentially. And then when we feel it's ready, we start to combine them. We'll move the heart of the blend into our marrying tank. We'll add in our grain component, and then very, very carefully we'll adjust that to add in our 1991 top dressing. All along this process, we're tasting to ensure that the blend is going in the direction that we want it to go. And then once we have everything in the marrying tank, we walk away again and we let all of those whiskies get to know each other. Again, anything from 2 weeks to 1 month. When we feel everything has married together nicely at full proof, we'll move all of that liquid into our proofing tank. And our proofing is where we get incredibly meticulous. So when we proof a whiskey, we allow the whiskey to tell us at what proof it needs to be bottled at. We try it all the way from cask strength down to 40%, and then we agree the exact ABV that the whiskey needs to go into bottle at. We then proof very, very slowly. We proof at no more than 2% per day. We never go any faster than that. It can take anything up to 3 weeks to proof a batch of whiskey because of how slowly we do it. We use local water. It goes through a reverse osmosis filter, and then we dribble the water incredibly slowly into the tank over a period of several hours until we have reduced the ABV by 2%. And then we stop. We give the whiskey a good old stir, we let it rest overnight, and we begin the process again the next morning until such a time as we have hit the exact ABV that we need. We do this because it's the traditional way very often that whiskey was proofed down. We want to give the water molecules and those whiskey molecules time to get to know each other and time to meld together nice and slowly. Everything that we do around here is slow and measured and centered around precision, so we have the time to do that. We know each one of our casks individually by flavour, so very often when it comes to blending, particularly on a small scale, it means that we're partially disgorging casks, because maybe we want 50 litres of flavour for one particular cask and 20 litres from another. That means that we have to be incredibly precise about that to get those elements of flavour together. So in order to do that, we've devised a methodology whereby we partially disgorge casks by weight. We use a series of industrial and bench scales in order to ascertain exactly the amount of literage of whiskey that we need to go into a blend, just to get the right level of flavour that we're looking for out of each cask. Every single bottle of J.J. Corrie Irish whiskey is bottled right here on the farm. Bottling days happen a couple of times a month. We get the whole community involved. We've got cousins, we've got aunts, we've got uncles, and we're providing some much needed employment here to this rural area. But you can be rest assured that every single one of these bottles has been lovingly hand bottled by one of us.